If you're interested in having sessions or certification training, go to pastlifeawakeninginstitute.com for details. Thanks for watching and enjoy this episode. Welcome to the podcast, Katische. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
So this is Katische Haberfield. She's a spiritual regression therapist, which means she practices modalities like past life regression, between lives, and she's a specialist in spirit releasement therapy and working with starseeds. She's a psychic medium, podcaster, and author. So you can find her at her website, katische.com. Her YouTube is Katische Haberfield. Her podcast is The Infinite Life. And her IG, The Infinite Life Podcast, has got details for that as well. So thanks so much for being on the podcast. It's great to see a spirit releasement therapist and specialist. So I thought we could start by going through some of your background. So in order to become a spirit releasement therapist, that pretty much means some things must have happened at a personal level in your life. People don't sort of wake up one day and think, what am I going to do? It's something that happens to us and we have to figure it out and go through it. And that enables us to process it and overcome it. And if we're healers, that can then give us the tools that we need to help other people. And we then often find as we develop in our career that our specialties attract certain types of people to us. And for you, that's starseeds quite a bit. So can you just begin by telling us a bit about how you use our modalities together? So spirit releasement as a headline, but how would you describe the combination of modalities that you use?
Well, spirit release is kind of like a interesting topic, isn't it? It's not something that you do think, oh, when I grow up, I want to be a spirit releasement therapist. It came for me by examining my own life and thinking, why is it that people find me too intense? What is it about my energy that people don't seem to gel that well with? And why do they think I'm a little bit too much? I came to the crux of my situation in understanding who I was and why people reacted interestingly to me. Because I don't know if you remember, at the start of COVID, there was a new social media app called Clubhouse, which was audio only.
Yeah.
And so I was like really tired of Facebook at the time, and I was hanging out a bit on Clubhouse, and I was doing mainly sound healing at that time. And so I thought, well, audio only, perfect. I'll go in and I'll learn Clubhouse. And I went into a Clubhouse room, and I set my intention. I was like, I've come into this one because I want to learn about what they're talking about. And I came into the room, and it shows you when people come into the room with the little icons. And the moderator said, to the person that entered the room, this is my domain. I request that you leave. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. I know that I'm the only person who just entered the room, and I entered with a pure intention. What's that all about? And it kind of really shook me, and I had been watching people say, oh, you've got quite intense energy. And I had been watching my journey of my physical features over time. And my physical features and the way I look has varied dramatically over the last 20 years. I go from having really, really short, dark brown hair to the blonde that I have now. And I noticed that since childhood, there were specific haircuts that kept recycling through my lifetime, and that my personality seemed to change with different haircuts. So when I have blonde hair, I'm very positive and upbeat, and I feel confident and extroverted. When I have dark hair, I feel like I'm hiding. I'm stepping back, and I don't want to be around. I want to retreat from life. So I was in some Facebook groups, and I came across a lovely husband and wife team who were doing some energy healing. And so I went in with their groups, and I really enjoyed their energy healing, and they did some private sessions with groups as well. And so I was in the private session group, and they're the kind of people who can see past lives just instantaneously. So they tap into your energy field, do quantum healing, understand your past lives. So they did some pretty spot on past life reveals that I then was driven to go and do my own Akashic records to prove them, because they were so spot on, and they were things that I thought that were me my entire life. But one of the things that happened was that I won a session that was a private one-on-one session with this particular lady. And I said to her about this energy situation and how people were reacting to me. And she said, in this session, she's like, okay, we have a past life possession. And she tried to get rid of this past life possession, and it involved putting hands like here and under the jaw and doing a forcible thing. And she said to me, you've had this possession since birth. You've worked symbiotically. You're like you've been a team. She said you're having trouble releasing him because you work together. You're like twins, and he doesn't want to go, and you don't want him to go. So you have to really help me let him go. And I'm like, no, I really want him to go now. And so I said to her, who is this person? And she's like, well, I hate to tell you this, but he's really quite negative. We would call him a black magician or a sorcerer. I'm like, doesn't sound like me. I've never dabbled in witchcraft. I've never been interested in witchcraft. I've never been interested in spells. I've never been interested in anything like that. Why would I host black magician or sorcerer? And she said, I don't know how to say this to you, but in 40 years of doing this, I've never met anybody as so power hungry and evil as him. And I was like, wow, okay. This is interesting. Anyway, so he went away, and I felt good. And then I actually interviewed a lady on my podcast a few months later, and she works with ghosts. She calls herself the ghost helper, not the ghost hunter. So she works with Earthbound Spirits, and we did this amazing interview. And at the end of it, she's a lovely lady, but she's ex-military, so she's very straight to the point. And she was like, I want a copy of the file, and I'm going to put the audio and video on my podcast and YouTube as well. I was like, okay, all right, never had that before, And I tried to send her the file, and I tried so many times, and she was getting very frustrated at me, like I was trying to avoid sending the file. And I said, no, look, here's a screenshot of all the times I've tried to send you this file. And she said to me, okay, I see that we do have interference here. And I said to her, funny that, because I wonder if it's my dude come back. This, and I told her the story, and I said, it's a black magician, sorcerer. He's been with me since birth. We tried to get rid of him once, but I feel like he is blocking and he's come back. And so I had a session with her just via the phone from America, and she did like an exorcism to get rid of him. And it was a very in-depth process, very intense. And to be frank and fair, I told her he was a black magician and sorcerer. So that was the information that she had. So she already had her defenses up. She has dealt with a lot of stuff from the military side of things in dealing with dark force entities. And so she was prepared for this monstery person.
Can I just make a couple of comments there? Like, there's what you tell her, but like, she's free to go and gather her information herself. So
yeah, true.
We know as therapists, there's the presenting issue and the real issue. And so anytime anyone tells me anything about their things, I take it with a grain of salt or a starting point, and I go and find out for myself. And just also, like, while we're on this, I think it's really interesting for people to notice. So how does spirit releasement even become an issue? And a lot of times it is when people work with the occult in some way, and it can be black magic, white magic, accidentally getting involved in it. But in your case, it's like, well, I had really never been involved or interested in any of this whatsoever. But this is where past lives become so important to spirit releasement. It's like, well, I've never dabbled in any of this. How would I have picked up an attachment? Well, you could easily, in fact, most people will have at some point in some past life have dabbled in it. Hence, you can pick it up that way. So I think it's a really interesting thing for people to know.
Yeah, so she tried to get his story and tried to talk to him, and it didn't work. And in the end, she used force and started calling him a coward, to try and provoke him.
Okay.
And he went. It was a great big thing for both of us. But at the end, to be honest, and I have great she's a friend of mine. So all due respect, we all have different methods. She achieved the outcome, but I felt violated in the end. I felt like there was something wrong in the way that it was released, because I really wanted to know the story and we didn't get to the story, and I felt like something was done wrong. Something wrong. I felt disrespected. At the end of it, I felt lost for a few days, because I was like, well, this is me now without this other entity that I've operated with for so long, and I had to re-find who I was.
Absolutely. That's a huge thing, by the way. That's another reason to really get the true story, because there's the integration and post-process. And a lot of times what Katische is saying here is that this was here with me from birth, and you've been working symbiotically together. That's a very important statement. So that, if you're going to rip out half of somebody's being and then say, all right, well, good luck with it now, it's like, and so it's almost like there's if you're born with a conjoined twin or something and one of them doesn't make it. I mean, it haunted Elvis his whole life. And it's the kind of thing where like you want to have a ceremony and a kind of a funeral in which there's an anger at it, but there's also a sadness and going through a grieving process and a ceremony in which there's all of that kind of thing is very important for a healthy exit and post-release integration.
Absolutely.
So just really remember those. So whenever you're gathering, firstly, gather the information and not just assume based on what someone else has told you, but also like really understand the significance of it. And so a lot of people might think, oh, an attachment came along, it's been there for a few weeks or months or whatever, it's just clinging on. But when they have been such a significant part of someone's life, and in this case, it's a past life, it can be a fragment or it can be a past life personality, that it's integral to the person. And so you have to deal with it as such. It's not something you just cut out and flush out. It's something you really have to process. So yeah, great story. Keep going.
Yeah. So, and one of the things was, as you can see in the background here, for those who are watching the video version of this on YouTube, I was a sound healer for a while. Sound healing came in COVID, and I trained in sound healing using the crystal singing bowls. One of the things was that I knew intimately without I guess I picked up ridiculously fast the sound healing, and I knew how to, from the sound healing, take people into shamanic journeys that I shouldn't know how to, really deep moving of energy. And I also knew how to then use the singing bowls to take people very quickly and very deeply into a hypnotic state. So when we were removing him, in the very first session, Sandra said to me, he wants you to know and realize that your skills in sound healing are something that he's taught you. And so what happened to me was that, I, for a while there, stopped doing sound healing, because I was like, it's that reaction. It's like, you have to think, have I done anything right or wrong with sound healing? Have I been using it purely? If he's a so-called baddie, have I influenced anything negatively? Like, you have to really sit there and think with your morals and your ethics about what you've been doing as a client. And I just shut down that side of my business. And all my clients know this story. And I was like, I'm not doing any more sound healing until I've processed this. So I shut my business down completely, 100% for 3 months. So that was a big integration thing for me too, as well, was to be, okay, if I had this talent because of somebody in the past, and now that person is gone, A, can I do it by myself? B, how do I feel about it? And at that time, it was just like, I don't want to touch a bowl. I don't want to touch a singing bowl anymore. And I worked through that. And, I use the bowls now. But at the time, I couldn't touch them. I was just like...
Yeah, I think that's really good, because it's really about separating the teachings from the teacher. Regardless of where you got regardless of who taught you, you've got the teachings, you can now separate that out. And so, but that confusion is something that, and you've now picked it up because you've been able to integrate it. But a lot of people would drop things and throw out the baby with the bathwater, and which is counterproductive and not helpful. So that's a really big part of like successfully integrating it and being able to distinguish between some of these subtleties, rather than everything is now been tainted and it's unethical to practice it. To me, doesn't add up. And that you're able to process that and get to that point now is really helpful. So that's yeah. So again, this ongoing integration is a really important part of spirit releasement therapy, and that's actually, it's just to make a quick distinction. A lot of times, spirit releasement therapy is just simply finding a fairly random entity and releasing it, and I would call that simple releasement. And that's what a lot of people think SRT, spirit releasement therapy, is, because that's all they've ever done. But these symbiotic relationships that go on for decades are a significant portion of complex spirit releasement therapy. And people need to understand the difference between a randomish one that's around for a little while, causing a bit of mischief, but that's quite different to these symbiotic ones that have really been an inherent part of people's identity. So when you take them off, they really have this thing, like you said, I'm not quite sure who I am. Am I a sound healer or not? You know, and a lot of these things, am I a really driven corporate person, which you used to be? And then, you know, that people can really flip on the other side and be really, and like you said, be lost, be confused about who they are. So a lot of spirit releasement therapy is, and I'm finding this even more recently, is that you spend the 3 sessions getting for 3 or 4 sessions getting really detailed stories from the entity. But I'm now doing a number of sessions as ongoing therapy to help people rediscover and be their identity, and to unravel all of these aspects. Where is that me or was it the entity? And all of those confusions. And if that's been part of their daily life for decades, there's quite a bit of work there, and it's really important work to continue to do. And it's certainly, that's completely different to going in, grabbing it and throwing it out in 5 minutes. We're talking about, you know, tens of hours of ongoing coaching and therapy.
Yeah, because for me it was then disassociating the fear with having an attachment, because immediately you know, one of the things that I teach my clients is, you know, you can't just become fearful about the attachment. You have to understand the lessons behind it. And as you were just saying, since that person was removed, I've then had to actually spend a lot of time, and I've only just recently learnt the story, going back into past lives and understanding why, what he was, his story, who he was in my past, why he was seen to be an angry dark force entity, and learn that story. And actually, his story, it took me a very, very, very long time to be ready to learn that story. I had to do a lot of other regressions before I was able to access that one. I had seen snippets of the story over many different times. So many times, so I would use like your recordings to try and do things by myself in between, go to my own practitioner. And I had seen snippets of his lifetime that were very, 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 very vivid to me. And it wasn't until I was actually ready to go in and find the reason that I then could piece together, in fact, that he had been with me, my soul, not just for my incarnation, but many, many, many incarnations. And that's what I'm finding in a lot of my spirit releasement cases, is that somebody attaches and they go with them incarnation after incarnation after incarnation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's quite complex then, because it's not just the one personality, it's all of your personalities for you know, several hundreds to thousands of years that have all had this person influencing their personality, and they're like, well, who am I and who are you? And you know.
Yeah, that's a great point. And so as a teacher of spirit releasement therapy, I find people will often come to me and say, teach me how to make the spirits go. And if it's simple, maybe, but I really only teach the complex ones. And I find that you can't really do spirit releasement therapy without doing past life regression therapy. And what you're saying here as well is, it's not even just that you have to know the basics of past life regression. You have to be able to do process a series of lives sometimes in order to be able to get to the significant one. You have to peel off so many layers of the onion before you can get to the core of it. And that can, and part of what that can do, so I heard you talking about that past life, and so you were an evil sorcerer apparently, and we can then be very judgmental and labeling of that person. But in that past life, you found out, well, he was doing his best and he was wanting to help, and was was tortured and abused, and had good reason to be angry and frustrated. And And so then you can go and do the healing to that person, and then that transform them from an angry person to a person who's to able to and to see the good in them. And so you go in without labeling them and finding that out and doing healing on that person. And then and then it's because of that, then they're able to release. But you have to do that healing on that entity or on that aspect. And so that you have to use the hypnotherapy, or you're doing regression to the cause of an issue. So hypnotherapists will be familiar with this, but you're really just doing it on that past life personality. And then once you've cleared all that way, then you can do some of the formal process of spirit releasement. But if you haven't done that prerequisite preparation, then good luck. You're going to have real trouble with the really complex ones.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a really interesting situation to be able to understand, I guess, compassion for yourself and for others, and to deal with and transmutate emotions and go through that healing process. And because he was an alchemist, what I love about that is that through the work that we do in all of the spiritual releasement and regression therapies, is we're alchemizing emotions and releasing and changing and creating new pathways for people by looking at root causes and reframing. We are alchemists. That is what we do. We're helping people access the mind stream of all times, finding issues, showing them new perspectives, giving them healing, reframing, allowing them to move past and forward in the future. And that is, in my mind, transformation, which is alchemy.
Yeah.
Alchemy is not just changing metals into gold.
Yeah. Okay. So when you had those experience with, and it's also there are various levels of releasement and practices. Everyone's got their own way of doing it, and that may work a lot of the time with a lot of the people they work with. So a lot of times people, they think spirit releasement is what I would call simple releasement, because that's 95% of what they see. And then but what did you learn by going through that in terms of how the world works, how therapies work, and then how you've been able to apply that as you do these therapies with people, so you can meet people maybe you're in a similar situation to you or some degree of it. And so what did you learn by going through the process yourself, and how do you use what you've learned to help others?
So the biggest thing I've learned is compassion, and specifically the way you speak to those that you need to release.
Yep.
For me, it has a greater story because I had a second attachment, and I also deal a lot with earthbound spirits and crossing them over, and so it's got to do with my soul's actual journey. But
Actually, sorry, I tell you what, can I do want to ask you specifically, and we want to have that as a next category that we get into. But just before we move on to that, what would you say now to people who are doing the kind of releasement, which is I'm going to go grab it from the jaw, or I'm going to exorcise it and threaten it and provoke it? And what would you say to people who are doing that kind of practice?
The word foolish comes to mind. Because what we want to do is there is always a reason for an attachment. Okay. And so we want to understand the reason. And so a lot of people that I come across, there's something that happened in a past life that made them have a earthbound spirit or whatever come and attach to them. And it's a lesson that they have to learn. They need to understand what the situation was at the time, a spirit only attaches to you if there's a like energy. They see something in you that is a reflection of them or something that they need. And so you have to take them to that lifetime or that moment in their current life through, just going back to age regression to the moment where the spirit has attached, to find out what it was that drew that spirit to them in the first place. What was the situation? How are they feeling? Because their emotions that they're feeling at that particular time is what draws the spirit to them. And then what were the lessons that both of them, both the spirit and the person who is the host, they both have separate lessons, and you need to understand how that fits together, because the person who doesn't cross over, doesn't go to heaven, there's a lesson. There's usually a fear or something that's a false notion about why they need to stay behind. That's one set of lessons. And then there's a lesson to the person that's attracted that spirit. And so if you just remove them without finding out this, it's like putting a new paint of coat over a moldy wall.
Yeah.
You,
Like, I think a really key point you made there as well about the emotions that people have draw in attachments. And so for me, one of the key things is if you're like physically trying to grab it and pull it out with your hands, then the therapist is really getting involved. If you're trying to do an exorcism style where the client feels violated, but they're then using aggression and getting angry at the attachment and maybe feeling frustrated and then trying to provoke them in that way. The energy the therapist has in that state is not calm, clear, confident, at peace. And so what I find is that when people do this, so the thing is like on one level, whatever works. If people can do this and get away with it and it works for them and they're like, well, I do this kind of stuff a lot and it kind of does work and I get good results, great. And that can be the case a lot of the time. But what I also find is that people who do that kind of releasement find that they can pick up attachments themselves because the energy they have while they're doing that releasement, you're sort of playing its game. And they're trying to provoke you and troll you into having those kind of emotional responses. And we just want to be really calm and clear and at peace while we're doing it. And afterwards, if I'm doing spirit releasement therapy with really funky, nasty guys, afterwards, I don't have to do any protection things. I don't feel drained. I don't feel empathetic, whatever. It's just another day. And I'm clear and calm and at peace during it and afterwards. And what I find is people who come for training say, I've been doing releasement in this way, but it wipes me out for 3 days afterwards. Or I've picked up a few attachments and I want you to help me release them before I go on and do the training. And so that's one of the things.
yeah.
And so the message to the people who are doing it that way isn't that you're doing it wrong. It isn't that that's bad or anything. It's just that's as far as you've got now. Understand there is another way. There is another
There is
step.
another.
There is another step forward, and it's easier for you. It's easier for your client. It's easier for the entities. It's just a lot easier and more peaceful. And just to understand that that can be like that. And the people that contact me for training, maybe they don't even know that exactly, but they're just exhausted and wiped out after years of doing that and are hoping that there's another way and want to talk to me and find out, is it possible? So I'm just telling you now that it absolutely is. And because we don't want to have our clients feeling violated. And we don't want to be wiped out ourselves. And we want to and also we want to be, in order to do this work, we have to like look forward to it and find it sort of fun and interesting instead of, oh no, I have to get into a fight with some, it's the confrontational, like no one really eventually you're going to get sick of doing that kind of work and stop doing it.
Yeah, I consider it the greatest privilege of my life to be able to do it because
it's the nastier they are, the more satisfying it is, and it's kind of my favorite. They're my feel good sessions. The worse they are, I know not many people can do this, and I feel great working with the real nasty ones, and it's like the most improved as well. If you do kind of the easy ones, or just but to really switch things in such a big move, it's the there's a real fun and joy and lightness in it, no matter how dark it is. And I think that.
I think for me too, it's very interesting to find out the story of the person that is attached to somebody else because I sometimes the clients are crying when they tell that story. When they let them tell their story, it's just really a compassionate, moving moment to find out what happened to this person, how they died, how lost they were, and to quell the fears they have about the afterlife, to deal with society's fear of death, and to help them understand the process of grief and why it is vitally important that they do cross over and do release for themselves, for their loved ones that they left behind, and for the health of the person that they've attached to. So it's a holistic health thing for everybody.
Yeah. Okay. So actually, you're talking more about Earthbound Spirits at the moment. I was kind of had Dark Force entities in my mind, but so let's just we're clear on some of the distinctions. So Dark Force entities, for those who haven't not sure, they haven't had a human incarnation before, and they will be deceived and attempt to deceive people. They're the really aggressive ones, and they require one way of dealing with it. But Katische is now talking a bit more about Earthbound Spirits. So let's get onto that as the next subject. So you said as well, like, how did Earthbound Spirits become a real thing for you? And you had a person in your life attached. So can you tell us a bit about your personal experience that then fed into your healing skills?
Yeah, and to be clear, just so I can make the distinction, why I sometimes cross those two lingos over, it's because in my personal experience, I find that those that present as DFEs are actually earthbound spirits that are angry. So they're not really DFEs. They're just like, I'm going to pretend to be angry, and and they will present themselves as DFEs, and then when I dig down, they're actually human beings who are just afraid, very, very afraid. So
yeah, that's a great point. And to add one more category, you can have an earthbound spirit who has a DFE attachment, and and you can have an angry earthbound spirit, but the DFE is amplifying their anger, and so then you have to go through releasing the DFE first, and then processing the human anger second. So is that something you see as well? You get DFE attachments to earthbounds?
Yeah, the majority of the clients that I have, it is more the earthbounds. There's been a couple of DFEs, but the majority, I'd say 80% of it is the earthbound spirits and the ETs. Yeah, so the earthbound situation for me was that, so this has to bring in my story here a bit. So I went through quite a tumultuous period in my life where a number of things happened at once, and that was I became separated from my husband when I had two small children, and so they were like 2 and 4. My father got diagnosed with terminal prostate cancer, and the period between diagnosis and death was 8 months. And then I had a good friend of mine from school had a fall on a bike, and she had a double brain stem stroke and became locked in. So in a 12-month period, that all happened. It was intensely difficult,
can I just
emotional time.
So locked in, how do you define that?
You can do nothing but blink.
Okay. So it's a physical condition where you're essentially completely paralyzed and able to communicate. How do they communicate?
Blinking.
Really? Okay. No voice cords or nothing. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So that's a massive life event for the person, but also for their close friends. Okay.
Yeah. So 3 forms of death, so to speak: a real death, a divorce is a form of death, and then an almost death situation.
Wow.
So when my father was diagnosed with prostate cancer, I was there. We did it at home, in person, at home palliative care. It was a very short period of palliative care, only a couple of days at Christmas time. And he died in our living room. He died on a hospital bed in our living room. And I had read Sogyal Rinpoche's the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. And so I knew the signs to watch out for his dying. And so, like, we were doing the last cleans of the night, and I said to my mum, and we had a doctor there, quick look, Dad's about to die. Because I felt the body changes. I saw I just knew he was about to die.
Yeah.
And we all looked, and Dad took the last breath. We watched the breath leave his mouth, and then he cried because he didn't want to go, and he died. And from that moment onwards, I spent a few years really deeply mourning him and writing a book about the death process. I think I read several hundred books about death, NDEs. I went and volunteered for the hospice, you name it. And at that point, I was aware of his presence, but I thought it was him in spirit, crossed over, and he would ring the chimes, and my kids would have characteristics that were alarmingly like him. And it wasn't until after I had the original spirit released, I went to pick up my mum to take her to my old next door neighbour's house for dinner. And I was getting more and more agitated. I spent, so this is a period of 10 years, between his death and this happening. During that period of 10 years, and I'll be quite honest about this, a lot of people know this struggle that I had, really bad anxiety and panic attacks where I would wake up in the middle of the night and just vomit until the morning, like nonstop vomiting. Really bad anxiety. And I did a lot of modalities and healing to get around that. And then I had a period where there just wasn't there. And then I went to this dinner this night, and the key was that my mum was there and the close friends. And I just, by the time I got home, I was so agitated and ready to have another panic attack. And I said out loud, Dad, you're attached to me, aren't you? You haven't crossed over. And the anxiety that you have felt for me and the situation that I've been in, bringing up 2 kids by myself, struggled with career, dating, all the different things over a 10-year period, that's what I'm feeling in my physical body. And so I used the process that I'd learned to cross him over myself. And I was like, okay, I felt the physical release. When I do spirit releasement on myself, I actually physically move, like it's a big energy thing. And I was like, I'm pretty certain. And then I was good. And it wasn't until I was doing some Earthbound Spirit work that I hired a medium to kind of try and have discussions with the spirits after they crossed over. And she brought through my dad. And there's a half-hour recording of Dad explaining to me why he didn't cross over the lessons, and that it was specifically tied into my soul purpose. He's like, I had to make a conscious decision not to cross over in order for you to understand that this experience has happened for you, not to you. And it's linked to what you're here to do. And then I had another medium come through who was also explaining some other messages from Dad. And I haven't heard a lot from him since, but it confirmed my understanding that he was attached to me for 10 years. So yes, I had a double set of pretty major attacks.
Well, that's a great principle there, which so it can be, really throw you off course or magnify things and make life difficult, for a long period of time. And that can even, affect, remarrying or my own progression, a lot of personal, professional life. So one of the things that I find that even once you do the releasement, as you're saying here, like after he's been released, then talking to it, I find this as part of the ongoing therapy is really understanding, no matter how horrific and scary and disruptive and damaging it was to the life, at some level, it's okay. At some level, it was planned. At some level, it had to happen. At some level, it wasn't really wrong. So, I got violated by a therapist who did this and that. And as a trainer, I might say, well, let's train people to not do that. But I also recognize it's fine that happened. Like, if they're doing that, that's okay. If it happened to you, it's okay. And part of it is because it can motivate or really give you the visceral experiential lesson on this is how it can be done. This is how I can progress and do it. And we're all just progressing.
Yeah, and it's done 2 things for me. My dad's attachment is that all throughout Dad's life, he dropped a whole bunch of hints, sang silly songs, and had things that I have now since learning about his role and our role together, have understood that they were clues to past life incarnations that I needed to understand. That he's told me from the other side that he didn't even know he was dropping them.
Yeah.
But now that he's crossed over, it makes complete sense to him. And they were really important parts in my healing to get to where I am today, to put those pieces together in the puzzle. Yeah. So this interplay between he and I in terms of helping me in this lifetime is very big. The second thing is that it helps normalize it in a way for the clients that I have, where there's a lot of my clients who come to me and it's a family member who's attached to them, or 2 family members, or a series of family members. And I can say to them, it's okay. There's nothing wrong with you. It's quite common if you are very close to somebody for them to feel some kind of guilt, like they haven't done something for you, or they need to repay something to you, or they need to protect you. And so they falsely think that by sticking around, they can look after you.
Yeah.
And I understand that from a personal, visceral level. And it helps me then also explain to the Earthbound spirits who are attached to the clients, I understand this. And my dad did this too. And I understand why you'd want to stick around and protect. But, because we've introduced them to their spirit guides and verified them beforehand. It's like you can see she has these spirit guides, or he has these spirit guides who are here. You've heard how long they've been around, and their job is to protect in this particular part of the area. So you don't need to do that. And a lot of the time I then say the piece is, I find out what is it that the reason that they wanted to stick around. And I'll say, so like I've had somebody say, well, I want to help them with their business. And I'm like, okay, but the insight that I have for you today is that from the afterlife, you've got greater clarity, you've been healed, you've learnt your life lessons, and if you wish to, and it's in your soul's path, you can be a spirit guide in that specific area of the life for your daughter or granddaughter or whatever it is. And as soon as you say that, they're like, oh, that's actually much more helpful, and I really like that idea of being a spirit guide rather than being physically attached and not getting my own healing. And I explain to them that they get much greater insights from the afterlife than from being an earthbound spirit. They're kind of helpless. They can't really do anything here. They can influence thoughts and physicality, but from a greater strategic perspective, go to the other side, get your healing, understand your soul contract between each other, and then advise as a spirit guide if that's what you want to do. So my own personal story there allows me to be able to really calmly have those discussions with spirit guides who are, with earthbound spirits who are not interested in going. They want to stick around.
Yeah, and you say it calmly, but you also say it with authority.
Yeah.
So you've got the spiritual authority from experientially knowing deeply and seeing powerfully in your life that that's how it is. And they may then try and debate with you, argue, present a counter argument, and you go, no, listen, I know this inside out and back to front, and here's how it is. Because this is, if you're a therapist and you're talking with an entity or of any form, they're going to come up with stuff that maybe you're not quite sure about or you haven't heard, and there's a learning process. There are insights that you may have, and you may doubt or wonder, what do I know? What are they saying? But so the first thing is really ask a ton of questions. And what I find is even if you don't have a spiritual authority through personal knowing, if you there's that phrase, give somebody enough rope and they will hang themselves. So you ask enough questions, they'll give enough information. If you really think clearly about it, you'll see they've contradicted themselves. You'll see that what they're saying doesn't add up, and you can then call BS on them. But you said this, this, and this. But in order to do that, you have to really listen and really give them so much rope that eventually you figure out the inconsistencies on what they're saying. If you've had the personal experiences, you can do it quicker because you can say, like, I know from experience that what you're saying sounds pretty wise, but it's limited. And I'm going to show, and you've told me A, B, and C. Well, guess what, buddy? You don't know about E and F, so that's what it is. So I get the
I end up laughing and joking with them. I'm like, yeah, nice one, good try. Yeah,
exactly.
Do you know what I mean? It's like
exactly.
We have a laugh, and they're like, oh yeah, let's try. And then they'll try something else, and you're like, yeah, good one, another one. Yeah, no, like we have a laugh about it. It's like, come on, try harder. You can't pull the wool over my eyes kind of conversations, and you laugh about it because they're trying. You have to establish trust not only with the client but with the spirit themselves, and so it's about double rapport.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, not my first rodeo, buddy. Nice try, but and calling them out, and then what, and because you have to get the rapport, absolutely, and to get their respect. So they will often come in feeling like I know more than you do, and I don't even have to listen to you because I know this and that, and then once you reveal to them, hey buddy, you're not as smart as you think you are, then they're really like, oh, well, you actually seem to know a bit more about this. Therefore, instead of being a wise ass, maybe you can actually help me, and then you can.
Yeah.
But if you're newer to the game and it is your first rodeo, then spirits will run rings around people.
Yeah, and it's about internal strength and confidence yourself. And the thing that I particularly like in the process that I've learned from you was taking the client through their spiritual strength before you get to the releasement, so that they've got that certainty, and it also reminds you of your own certainty. What is your spiritual strength, and that helps in that process. It makes it less scary for the client. It makes them feel strong in themselves, and they also learn, emotions can act. I also have another category of what I call attachments. Emotions can be attachments because you can talk to various parts in the body where when they do that body scan, and it cannot be an ET or an EBS, it can be a thought form that they've attached to them from themselves or from somebody else, and you ask that thought form to speak and they will say whatever it is, and if they don't release that energy, that's what turns into cancer or whatever it is. So some of it is actually just the pure relief of moving stuck thoughts and emotions out of the body as well.
That's it's a good point. And just so emotions, absolutely. And then just in terms of that, the spirits can run rings around you. And what I find is sometimes I'll speak to therapists and they'll say, I talked to an entity and we came to a conclusion and it's actually fine because they said this and that. I was like, that's not fine. They just pulled the wool over your eyes, you know? And so, being attuned to that is useful. So that point about emotions, can you expand a little bit on how those emotions affect people?
The two main emotions that people come to that lead to spirit attachments, for example, are fear and anger. Fear and anger, the two main. An example of anger, and for a client is, I had a client who I've had a large number of sessions with, and she had some great success in the fields of money and love. And one of the underlying things across all of the past life regressions that she had was that she was in relationships with angry people, or she had a lot of fear in the lives that she was revisiting. So one of the spirit attachments that she had was attracted to her because of the energy in her house. So this was a gentleman who died in a street fight in the United Kingdom, and back in 1921, Jim. And Jim just stayed in the area near where he died, which was where she eventually bought a house. So when he died, there was no house there, but he stayed in the field area. And he said that what attracted him to this particular client was the anger that was going on in her household. And when he was alive, he loved the fight, he loved the sparring on the street, and he just enjoyed angry, anger was his world. And so he liked to hang around with her. And she had several marriages, and the last one was really quite tumultuous. And that's when he really attached to her. And he said what happened was that she then began to develop herself and move into the spiritual world, do a lot of healing. And the energy changed in her house. She kicked out her husband. She got therapy and she started to sing. And I wrote down specifically his words because I thought it was really quite insightful. He said, I used to like a good fight and a good drama, but I see I don't need it now, because Katie changed her life. I don't know what she did, but it's beautiful to be around her now. She plays music and sings music a lot, and there's something that's changed, and it's changed me as well. And he was able to release quite happily because he had seen the change in emotion from this client and his own emotion, and he saw that he really just enjoyed the new way that she lived, and he was therefore ready to release that anger. So that's an example of anger.
Yeah, so the moral of that, music calms the savage beast.
That's right. Music and laughter. She's a very funny person, so he loved the laughter, and he said we had a lot of good times together. Not that she realized, but
okay.
Fear is another one. I had a client who we took back to a past life in the 1300s in England, and her name was Jane. She was a healer who used to make potions. So back in those times, she would have been classified as a so-called witch. She basically was at the markets one day, and she was starting to get worried about her potions. It was at that time when the witch hunt was on, and she was worried what would happen if one of my potions hurt a client rather than healed them. Would I be found out? Would I be branded a witch? And she was at the market getting the potions, the ingredients to make her potions, and there was a little young lady who had, her name is Angel. She was 15, and she had an undiagnosed heart problem. She died walking to the markets, and she attached to Jane because of the energy. She was afraid when she died because she didn't know why she was dying. She just had that heart attack and died, and then it matched the energy of Jane, and they were nearby, so she attached. She was attracted to Jane's energy. And what happened to Jane was that their double afraid energies then began to be perceived by the clients. There was anything wrong with the potions that she was making. Because we asked her once she'd done her past life review, there's nothing wrong with the potions. It was that the clients sensed the fear in her, and so they began to believe that the potions might be tainted. And then what happened was a client did die because of this fear. And she was arrested and she was killed as a witch, burned as a witch. So that's the story that we had to heal.
Yeah, that's one thing you often hear from people with spirit attachments is that they say, I'm feeling a lot of emotions and I'm pretty sure they're not mine.
Yeah.
They're residues from an attachment. They can be residues from past lives, but they don't make any sense in terms of that present life personality. So yeah, it's a really helpful thing to be attuned to.
Yeah, and I do say to my clients, it's like, now that you've released these attachments, you have to learn what's your thoughts now, because you're going to have an empty space in your mind where other people's thoughts were, and you're going to be like, oh, I didn't believe that in the first place. That wasn't my thought. And, so it really is then a piece for them to relearn mindfulness in terms of observing thoughts, knowing what's theirs, what's the environment's, and what they truly do think and believe. So it's a really good exercise in understanding your own mind.
Absolutely. And so in terms of ongoing therapy and in terms of prerequisites for doing this kind of work, you mentioned reading Sogyal Rinpoche's books on, Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, Tibetan Book of the Dead's another interesting one. And in terms of, witnessing your own thoughts, that is one thing as well. Without an entity, our own mind, the monkey mind, runs away in its own emotions. And you don't have to be into SRT to notice that you can be possessed by negative thoughts or feelings, and witnessing them and having a sense of I'm not the anger. I can watch me have anger arise and dissolve. And so part of an ongoing therapy can be studying the wisdom traditions of the world, whichever one jives with you. And part of what prepares you to be a good healer, for me, I did spend a lot of time doing meditation and 10-day retreats and studying Tibetan Buddhism particularly. So that as a wisdom tradition foundation has been invaluable in the spiritual authority that I bring to not being hoodwinked by people who try and tell me about spiritual things. And if I don't really understand the landscape very well, then maybe I can have the wool pulled over my eyes. But particularly Tibetan Buddhism is very clear on calling BS. And I find that as a really helpful foundation. So as well, if you want to be really good at spirit releasement therapy, be good at past life regression, be good at hypnosis, be good at hypnotherapy, and study a wisdom tradition. And so that's coming through with what you're saying as well. Yeah, makes sense?
Yeah, I did do a lot of Tibetan Buddhism study. So yeah. It was my first past life reveal actually was when I had a very, very, very strong emotional reaction to a Geshe that I'd never met. And he's a mother from past life. Yeah. It's the very first episode of my podcast. Yeah. Is that story. Yeah. The interesting thing about your mind is that the thing that I do tell Earthbound Spirits is that they're always worried about heaven and hell. This fear-based religious doctrine that's come up through the centuries. And I say to them that hell is a state of mind, and particularly the situation that you find yourself in, a human being without a body, is my definition of hell.
Yeah.
Understanding to clarify and understand that there is no hell, there is no judgment day, to explain to them the process of life review, and judgment is only about yourself, and understanding the life between lives so that you can explain to them really makes them understand the fear-based constructs that are in their own mind.
Well, absolutely. It's the fear of hell is the hell itself. You could call it a purgatory, but the irony of it is that the fear of hell is like that's the only hell that exists, because once you do go to and pass over, it is infinite love, unity, and forgiveness. But it's even beyond forgiveness, because there has to be a self and other for forgiveness to exist. It's just a completely unified wisdom and or God or divinity, and God is love. And so that's what they're keeping themselves out of. And that's a good definition of heaven. So just not going to heaven is what hell is. When the
Yeah,
heaven is available and waiting and for you, and you just, what you're delaying for another 80
yeah,
years. Is that what's your
yeah. That's
plan?
right. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, yeah.
Then that, yeah,
It's not what they were. It's not what they're worried about. And when you can explain that, that, and mostly it's these people who think that they are bad because
right.
some silly little thing that nobody else would think they were bad for, but Catholicism or whatever form of religion that they were part of, they were taught that they were a sinner.
But they may also genuinely be bad and have murdered
Oh,
99
of course,
Buddhas.
yeah,
And they may have murdered 99 Buddhas. But he did that and became a Buddha himself because he got over it, And
yeah,
or they may be bad because the client thinks they're bad and the therapist got hypnotized into treating them as if they were bad, whereas they should be.
yeah,
So an entity can hoodwink you, but if you're a therapist, don't let your client hoodwink you, into
yeah. That's
believing
right. Yeah,
a false narrative that something's bad when at its core it isn't. Yeah, so cool. So can we let's switch into star seeds? So
yes,
can you
yes,
start
yes.
can you start by even like defining what is a star seed?
Yeah, so starseed's just a term that I picked from the popular narrative at the moment.
Right.
Okay, what I'm particularly passionate about is teaching people about the concept of the journey of the soul through the eternal mind stream. And so humans tend to believe and have this obsession with just Earth. And starseed is, in popular culture, what people identify with when they have this feeling that they are different from other people and that they belong somewhere else. And then they will self-identify with a particular planet or system and say, I'm A, like I come from Orion, or I come from Mintaka, or I come from the Pleiades, or whatever you are. It's very popular on Instagram and YouTube and all that sort of stuff. But my belief and understanding of reincarnation is that reincarnation is through everywhere. There is no place that you have not been, and that includes other locations in this universe and others. And each one of those, is simultaneous because there is no such thing as time other than in our mind construct. And so all lives are concurrent, and each different location has a different experience. So what I've discovered with starseeds, so people who are willing to explore and identify the fact that they may have non-human lifetimes, is that they have been on other planets for a particular reason for their soul's development. And they are here to explore, understand, and integrate that in this lifetime here on Earth and bring forward some of those skills. So when I help people find their starseed origins, it's for a particular reason, which is, why are we wanting to identify as a starseed at the moment? What's the curiosity factor? Is there something that your soul wishes to integrate in this lifetime? Like you have a healing ability that you're not quite tapping into, that you're actually here for. And so the you of other times is trying to give you a hand. They're trying to help out there. And or commonly for me, I've identified implants in a spirit releasement session, and that implant has been implanted by a loved one, a family member from the starseed location where they once were incarnated. And that's the kind of the link to the whole starseed thing. For me, it's a holistic looking at the journey of the soul over all locations in the multiverse and understanding what you're here to do, what your healer's path is.
Okay, cool. So I'll come back to the implants, but let's start. I'm curious about the spiritual entrepreneurs. So you said star seeds come and then they want to bring some of the wisdom from a other dimension or other location into that entrepreneurship. So what do you mean by spiritual entrepreneurs?
And so a lot of people who do Reiki, people who may do all different kind of modalities. So they may be soul contract or soul planners who identify what your path was here. They may be tarot readers, oracle card readers. They may be sound healers, all sorts of mediums. psychics, anyone who makes a living by using spiritual services in either a healing or a knowledge capacity or a teaching capacity. So they're the people that I call spiritual entrepreneurs. It's their shingle. They put the shingle up and they trade under the spiritual banner.
Okay. And do you find some common characteristics that can help people identify if they're a starseed or not? Some common experiences they may have?
So, for example, loneliness and a longing for somewhere, not having found a location that is really home for them, like they're missing something. That is very common with people from the planet of Mintaka.
Okay.
And that can be very easily abated by being around water more often. Mintaka is an ocean, a water-based planet, and these people really should spend and live the majority of their time near the ocean. And generally, they're feeling this loneliness because they're land-bound. They're living in the wrong country.
Yeah.
And it's what kickstarts them. They've got this urge. They're not settled. They don't feel like they're living in the right place. They feel at home by the water, but they don't know why. They start investigating dolphins and sound healing with dolphins, and they don't know why. And different locations have different characteristics, but that's a common one with the Mintaka is the water, and it's kind of just.
Well, that's great. And so you're talking about it's essentially there's a starseed, and that's a spiritual thing, but we're also talking about past lives. And so they're starseeds because now it's interesting. They may have had past life incarnations as humans. People can have past life incarnations on other planets as well. That's fairly, it certainly happens. And so with the starseeds, would you say that they haven't had earthly incarnations in past lives, but only in the past? Or maybe that's their most recent past life, where in a between lives environment, they agreed to go to Earth to bring in extraterrestrial or other knowledge.
The people that have I've identified with the starseed other lifetimes, they're from a very long time ago. The ones that I'm actually tend to do, they go straight back to like origin lifetimes where their first soul incarnates, the first portion of their soul incarnates, and that's not going to be Earth, is it? Because Earth is fairly late in the game. Yep. So I have clients who come who their first memory is being a light body.
Yep.
I have clients who have memories of an incarnation that is not experience based, like we would call right now we are in a human body, we have experiences, relationships are important, what we do is important, but their purpose in that lifetime on this particular planet was to seed a planet, start a planet, plant insects, grow trees, really out there kind of stuff.
Yep.
Or they may be from a lifetime whereby their job was to communicate with beings in distress across all planets. And so they're trying to teach concepts of spiritual knowledge of how to use your mind stream to access answers and get help outside of the human construct of how our human mind works. So they're quite different. They're not all just the let's go to the Pleiades. They're mostly locations where we don't have human knowledge of where these locations are because they're so far in the past. And what I'm finding is that these are so far ago. They're generally clients that I've done a lot of past life regression with already.
Right.
And then they'll spontaneously go into a galactic lifetime, or they're suddenly curious and they want to know why they feel a certain way, so they request it.
Right. So the past life regression you'd already done with them, was that to earthly incarnations?
Yeah.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So that's kind of a point. I think some people think I'm a starseed. I've got nothing to do with Earth. I feel lonely being on Earth because I'm really from another place. But my experience is that most people will have had a bunch of this life, human and earthly experiences, and a bunch of other ones. And so it often can be that it's just the most recent one was that. And so people who feel really out of place on Earth And that can be, I think, part of a slight distortion because my last life was on Earth, but a bunch of others were. And so that's one thing, in a way, and people can almost want to feel special. Like, I'm only from the stars, I'm not from the Earth, but I think everyone's got tends to have some kind of attachment. But also that on the flip side, what you mentioned there is a very valid thing that I see as well, which is that having incarnations which are essentially disembodied. You're in almost, it's not even necessarily another planet, but it's another dimension, which is not physically interactive with any terrestrial place. And it can be a place of pure learning, for example. And that's really a lot of what the between lives phase is. And so I find people, you can like incarnate in a past life on this planet or another planet, have a between lives where you decide, what am I going to do? I'm going to go and seed this thing. I'm going to go and be a spiritual entrepreneur. And then they pop off and they do that and just incarnate again. And that space in between might be, 49 days if you're Tibetan, or might be whatever it is. But it can be, I find people can really stay there and say, before I incarnate, I gathered a bunch of information in my past life that I want to take with me and keep evolving. I'm going to stay in that between lives area and study up as much as I can in order to take on the task that's coming ahead of me. So do you find that kind of stuff?
Yeah. It's all interrelated. It's just the way that I put it is that there's nothing in isolation. It's all part of your overall journey as a soul, and you will go many places for many reasons. And if you're interested in discovering this lifetime, it's because now is the time that your mind wants to put it together to draw things that are here for you right now. Otherwise, it's not relevant to you. It's for a reason that you're asking these questions and you're wanting to go into reincarnation and understand your whole journey. There's something in there that is important for you to know. It's not a tourism thing. We're not doing it for galactic tourism.
I think it's a good point. And people, I'm a star seed. I came from another dimension. But I think it's always important to remember, I was born on another planet. I'm bringing the wisdom of that planet. But always remembering that in between, there's another dimension which is not incarnate. It is a between lives one, where we have our ultimate soul, which is not connected to any place. And as you say, it's not connected to any time. I'm special because I come from this place in the past. But ultimately, the past is a construct and another place is still another place. Maybe whatever star it is. And so that can be part of an identity that you say, and it's useful to have starseed as an identity definition that helps me understand myself. But an ultimate definition does transcend a lot of these, and because because it can exacerbate loneliness. Oh, I knew that I was lonely because I really don't fit in here, and this is, a low, new, ignorant world, and I'm justified to feel alienated here. And so that's and so we don't, people, and so a lot of times these terms can help, but we don't want to be people lean into that alienation and difference, whereas we really want to be unified on the planet more than ever in this one.
Yeah, well, the way that I explain it all the time is we're like a flower, right? The soul is the center of our flower, and each petal that you have is the different incarnation, and the petals go off wherever they need to go to enhance the journey of the overall soul and the overall journey's complete learning and experiences. So it's a team. So you can't pull apart any of those petals, because without the petals, there's no flower. So it's a teamwork.
Well, that's such a useful understanding because, and this is where we get into the next part, and you mentioned it, there can be implants or monitoring devices from the planet that I identify more with than Earth, and we are bringing that knowledge back, and I have a device implanted, and I stick to that because, that's my ultimate higher core, whereas an ultimate core isn't related to any place. The ultimate core is beyond all space and time. And that's so you don't necessarily need that thing. It's not a higher authority necessarily. There is an ultimate one that transcends a need for anything that exists in any form of duality. And so that's kind of the therapeutic resolution that I find that we get to. But I'm interested to hear from you the process we get there. And so this is one thing that, again, and it really affects the interpretation you may have. Being a starseed is cooler than being on Earth. and better and wiser, and anything that they do is fine. And that may or may not be the case, but let's really dig in and find out the story. So what are the stories you find when starseeds come in? They find out they're from another planet or have origins there. They've got a task that they're doing. So tell us about how ET implants or monitoring devices work and the clients that you see.
Yeah, so and a good example of that was I had a client, and we identified when we were doing spirit release and we did the body scan that she had something that was implanted. A lot of the time it's behind the neck.
Yep.
Some clients can actually hear it make noises, or it's just uncomfortable. And so I ask who implanted it. I always work with Archangel Michael, and we bring in the person who's implanted it. Basically, we have a discussion. I say that, I come in peace. You've got a device in my client's body. The client's name's this. I'm just wondering what the purpose of the implant was. Curiosity. Can we have an open discussion? Why did you feel the need to implant it? Do you have a particular relationship with this client? What is it? And so far, presenting in my clients so far, it's been a familiar relationship, meaning it's my daughter, my son, my whatever. And I'll be like, so they lived with you from where you are from? And they will say yes. And I'll say, so I'll check the color of the light, what's the color of the light where you are? Why did you feel like that you needed to implant this device? And the answer can be for protection. So my particular planet was close to being destroyed, or it wasn't safe, or the toxic environment or something, and I needed to send my child away. And so this was how I was going to connect with them. And then I explained to them that whilst I understand that, like every parent would understand that, they're here on Earth and we have sovereignty over our body, and it's actually a universal principle of universal sovereignty of your body. And so the implant is, not in line with that. And I say to them, by the way, it's also out of date technology. You can actually communicate to this person who I understand you are very attached to. You have an emotional relationship with them through light language. Did you know you can speak to your loved one through light language? And they're generally like, oh, I didn't know that we could do that. I'm like, yeah. And by the way, that device is itching or hurting or bothering them. So can we have it removed nicely and neatly? And can you heal it, please? And can you report to whoever you need to report to get authorization to get it out? And by the way, this particular person is interested in understanding more about your relationship. So they're willing to do a regression to come and visit that lifetime. And generally speaking, they've been very, very excited. They're like, oh, okay, yes, we have things we want to teach them and remind them. We'll take it out straight away. And I'll say to them, okay, before we agree to this next regression session to that lifetime, can you do an activation? Some kind of light language activation, so that it's going to make us easier to find you, and they can bring in any innate healing ability. And they're usually ecstatic about that. And the client's really ecstatic because they're like, I've heard of this light language concept. I've seen it, but I didn't believe that I could do it. And it's a really beautiful experience because you get to understand that for those people who are scared of extraterrestrials and UFOs and all the scary stuff that you see on the TV, that we're talking about another soul who just happens to be in a different form of a suit, yeah? And they have the same, they're not exactly the same in the range of emotions, but we're all beings who have families and purposes, and we relate. When you can speak like this to these people from people, but beings from other locations, you realize we're all the same.
Yeah, well, that's a key point. And so they are souls. And so your client is a human. Your client was in the alien suit, the extraterrestrial suit, but your client also was a human before that. So one counter argument can be, I identify as an alien because that was my last incarnation, and I'm her mother. Well, you're not her mother in this life. You weren't her mother in a bunch of past lives. You're over-identifying with one familial relationship in one life. So there's a limitation there. But I understand as a soul, there's a soul purpose and mission. So that makes more sense to me. The other one, to be honest, doesn't make that much sense. I understand, and that's a little bit like your dad. I'm really like love her and I want her to be okay and hang around. Well, you know, and so,
Yeah.
and then the second part can be, okay, but no, I do have a purpose in there. So, maybe like I have a purpose and this is going to help her and she needs to go through this for 10 years. And I understand and agree with that. But let's find out exactly what that purpose is. And is this the most efficient, effective way of doing it? Are there other ways? And then that's what you've been able to present to them. So as you go through and ask those questions, and that can be the case in a lot of scenarios, but what's the breakdown in terms of percentages? Would you say that when I find a monitoring device and you have these discussions, are there times where you're ever convinced that it is actually appropriate and right for them to have a monitoring device implanted and that it's not itching or disturbing them and that it's actually fine and you let it be and you don't release it? How often would that happen?
0%. I've
Wow.
never left it in. Never.
Okay. Do you think you could ever be convinced? Or, okay. Yeah.
No, because no, it's not appropriate. Yeah, that's what we have a mind for. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, yeah, it's the kind of thing where, it's not, you're not his mother now. And so what I find is, but the important thing is, it's, you're going through and asking a lot of questions. And so one thing that I find is, and this comes back to that principle that, oh, it's a star seed, it's from a much wiser galaxy. I've got to do whatever they say, and I don't question it. So that's one thing where if anyone finds an ET implant or monitoring device in their client, um, what I find a default position for a bunch of practitioners is, oh, that's really cool. It's from a really wise civilization. We're lucky to have it. Let's keep it in there, or let's not even question it. And so you and I will both have a more likely than not, it's going to be released, and you have to come up with really good answers why it shouldn't be. I think I have heard once or twice something where I was like, maybe, but basically not really. But we want to get that. And so it's the whole thing about not being tricked by an entity that gives you a good sounding story. But if you really think about it, it really doesn't add up. And you also want to see, and is it negatively affecting somebody, or what's the cost? Or even if it isn't really costing them that much, is there a better way of doing it? And like you say, you open up a light language, there is a much better and easy way of doing it. And all of this stuff, anytime there's any emotion from the past or a past life influence, it's all just out of date. All of this stuff, you're not my dad anymore. You move on. Everything's out of date. So anytime you're doing any therapeutic resolution for any, emotional residue from when you're a kid, well, that's out of date. Be mature now and I think that applies equally to this. But the important thing is not to be awed by these things, not to be tricked and to have a spiritual authority and sovereignty and bring that in. And I think that's where some people, why they may allow it to be. So it's like, oh, but I found this device and it was actually perfectly okay because they gave me this and that reason. And I go, well, that reason sounds wise, but it's not that wise. So you got tricked, you got hoodwinked by them and convinced, and they let and yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm fairly firm on that. It's also, mental telepathy. You can talk mentally. You don't need implants of any form. Let's upgrade our skills and use our skills more wisely.
Yeah, and your other thing was, really keep gathering information, learn the light language. But what you said as well was, once we've done the releasement, then ongoing therapy, just keep getting more and more information. Keep being curious and fascinated and learning instead of thinking and coming to a dead end, which is also, not that great for the client. It's not violating. They may not feel violated, but they don't feel, you've only taken them to a certain point. And so when you do these regressions, you're talking about, and this is a classic thing in past life regression, does reconnect with past abilities. And so you can separate the learnings from the learner, as we mentioned before. So they're really clinging on to, I'm teaching them, but they've got those lessons, and you can disconnect that. They can continue on with the learnings that they have and implement that without an umbilical cord. If your mother really loves you, Well, and she's walking around with an umbilical. You don't need your umbilical cord for the next 40 years. You can cut it. It's okay. Or you do need to mother that person until they're 18 or whatever it is, how much education they need. They can figure it out themselves. Let them go.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and so I think does that metaphor make sense? Or do you have another one?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And usually the thing that they need to learn from that lifetime is one skill. It's just
Yeah.
one piece of the pie. It's just one tool that they need in their tool belt, and they're a whole and complete person, and it's just like going to university and getting one more qualification. It's just or doing a course. It's just one piece of the pie.
You do have as a team that you work with archangels and a bunch of spirit helpers. So, and that in a sense can be seen as being an otherworldly kind of a wisdom. So can you tell us a little bit about how you work with your spirit team?
I've got quite a large. I had to write a A4 page,
Oh,
a
wow.
large number of spirit guides, because what I found is depending upon on where you are in your life and the number of incarnations that you have journeyed through, there are different people that are like, the different beings that are here to help you with different stages in your journey, right?
Yeah.
So, and it links very specifically to other incarnations that you have. So, I have a particular affinity for animals, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of the past life work that I've done has been investigating. I've done separate regressions to discover and explore relationships with animals. So a lot of those animals will actually work with me and help me in particular things. So, for example, I work with the very first spirit being that brought me an earthbound spirit to cross over was a wolf, white wolf. He's the one who identified that I needed to do some work crossing over spirits. American bald eagle is my one of my spirit animals as well. I have my primary team that I identify with, that I work with the most, that I work with personally, and then in the client work that I do, Archangel Michael, Archangel Raphael, because we do a lot of healing, Archangel Zadkiel, which not many people know very much about him. The other person that I identified with and do a lot of work with is, you may call him Jesus, you may call him Yeshua. And that's because of specific experiences that I've had in past lives. He's very important to me from those specific experiences and from a lot of my very heavy dogmatic religious incarnations. The spiritual theme of my soul's journey is to be involved in the development of human understanding of reincarnation through spiritual experiences and the development of religion over time. So it's really important for me, the learnings that I've had in various religions. So hence, I've had Buddhist incarnations, I've had Roman Catholic incarnations, I've been monks in multiple different religions. I've had Sikh incarnations. Like, the religion is the theme for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, Michael, Yeshua, Zadkiel, and Raphael. And then I have a little guy, Harry, who is an earthbound spirit that I crossed over this year, that I have a very strong relationship with. And I actually have a past life connection with him. Not from this lifetime, but from a previous lifetime. So what I find is that for me, it's very the people that I work with are because I've worked with them in other lifetimes, and they help me specifically for specific tasks. So yeah.
So how did you acquire these? And even being a psychic and a medium, was there, what stage did you recognize that? And did you acquire or gather up this team bit by bit? So how did you form these helpers?
Yeah. Oh, where to start? The Buddha was the first. So Buddha Shakyamuni is the very first one that I identify with.
Okay.
Because in the period of my divorce, I spent a lot of time in a Tibetan Buddhist monastery here in Queensland, and I'm had that past life insight with the Geshe, and in period of time when I was absolutely struggling and really, really down, trying to decide the ethics and the morality of stay or go, the Buddha appeared to me in a dream, and I cried and I woke from the dream, and he basically said, I'm here to help you. I will be there for you.
Yeah.
So he was very influential for me in that period of my life. It makes sense.
Snap, by the way. So for me, that's my first. And even just in terms of people who do spirit releasement therapy work, I think everyone is going to find, in fact, even if Archangel Michael comes up for you, sooner or later, you're probably going to be doing spirit releasement work. And this is what we're talking about, these wisdom traditions. And I think that's part of your spiritual authority, but also part of the real clarity. I had, very overwhelming experiences. And in that, Buddha came to me and it was like, this is a life raft in the turmoil of spiritual confusion and mixed messaging and all of this stuff. Here's the clarity, here's peace and calm. And I think whatever kind of work you're doing, whatever it is that you need, and like find some sort of base like that. And it's great that you have. And I think that empowered you, and that's your starting point. And from there, heal yourself, heal others. But yeah, so that's great. So that
Yeah.
was
So
just
just depends on the situation. Yeshua or Jesus, however you want to call him. For me, I was brought up Christian, and so it was a big struggle. Not a struggle. It was a big question when I switched over and spent a lot of time in the Tibetan Buddhism world. I was like, am I being disloyal? It was a big conflict between me and my ex-husband. My family didn't understand, and Jesus or Yeshua was one person that I always seen when I closed my eyes, and never understood why. I had a podcast interview with medium Courtney Dillon, who channels the Ascended Masters, and I said to her, I'm born on Christmas Eve, 9 p.m. I always joke that Jesus and I are best friends, and I said I always see him when I go closed eyes, and I feel like he's a guide, but I feel like that's a ridiculous thing to say. And she just kind of looked at me and went, well, there might be something there. You might want to have a look into it. And then, I was pretty fiercely brought into some past lives where I understood the real connection and the struggles that I have had in past lives, which are on my podcast. There's the one where I'm a monk in the what's now Westminster Abbey, and the spiritual lessons that I was learning about the difference between religious doctrine and what I knew at a soul level, and the conflict that I had. One lifetime at the actual time of Jesus, not in his followers or disciples or everything, but a different role. And then when I do healing through the Akashic lifetimes after these really particularly difficult religious lifetimes, Jesus has been there to supervise the healing, to show me that I've had a role in this for humanity, and that there's no disloyalty. And then he'll bring in others to show me that there's no disloyalty between religions. It's all part of a learning, and that I've learnt over different lifetimes, different religions, in order to evolve my soul and evolve the difference between the truth and doctrine. And so that's why they will only show me a guide when I unlock a lifetime that it's relevant to, pretty much.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. And so that your past life regression experience on yourself helped you access and understand spiritual entities and divinities that could help you. And so, and they're helping you directly. It sounds like I find I wouldn't necessarily say I have a spiritual team that helps me, or do any direct ways of bring them up or working with them. I wouldn't use that kind of terminology, but I didn't have a Christian background at all. I might have been a bit averse to it. I went around Europe and didn't go to the church as I wasn't interested. But then when I learned Buddhism, I would meditate and Jesus would pop into my meditations all the time. I'm like, dude, I was looking for Buddha. What are you doing here? And so it's a kind of thing where, whether you want it or not, that surprise factor. But I think indirectly, and you do have to do a bit of the research and the spiritual practice, but you may, and I think they're helping a lot of healers indirectly. But the more that you can work on your own spiritual path helps. But In terms of, and so whether, so maybe you have, maybe you're not sure if there are people helping. I'd say a lot of people may not say they've got a spiritual team. They are being helped indirectly. But are there things that you do directly to work with a specific team that you're very consciously aware of?
Yeah, so because I do a lot of crossing over work, I work very directly with Azrael. And Michael all the time. He's just always there. My clients always mention him in sessions. Like, even if I don't even use the word, they will say something that will make me laugh. It's like to confirm that he's there. Like, he's a very funny being, and he's not presented that way in traditional literature and dogma. And you know what, the very first experience where
sorry, that's right. I mean, they're presented with swords.
Yeah.
But I think what happened is people took that very literally. Whereas I think I see that as a sword of wisdom, which is cutting through the nonsense and the stories and the misleadings that things will try and do. So I think the sword is, and then you cut through the BS by laughing at these nonsense stories that semi-wise beings try and tell you. So that's what the sword's for. It's not for going there and kicking ass. It's for having a sense of humor and being very clear, a razor sharp mind, not not a physical, exorcism like that. Great distinction.
Yeah, he's hilarious. I mean, the first time that I had a client actually mention him, because one of the things that people say to me is that they don't know they have a spirit guide. So the first thing we do is we introduce them to the spirit guide. We do the test like you taught, which is cold, warm, which one's which. We do the validation checking, and was my we did a session, past life regression session, and I was doing the talking, and then the client said to me, "Oh, by the way, I just really have to tell you that Archangel Michael says," and then he goes, "Tips hat."
Okay.
And from then on, all my clients would do something funny where they mentioned what Archangel Michael said to me as a joke or a reference, or they would say, "Oh, Michael says to tell you, well done. He wasn't sure if you knew he was here, but yes, he was." Or he's become bolder and more frank, like to the point that recently was confirming an attachment, right? Doing a spirit releasement session. And I was like, okay, Archangel Michael, there's an attachment here. I want to confirm that I think this is actually a device. This is a device from an ET. Is this correct? And he said, well, what do you reckon? And then I was told very specifically through a mediumship session afterwards from a friend, she said, Archangel Michael says to tell you he's stepping back for a while because you are using him as a crutch. And he wants you to develop your skills and to know and trust your abilities and to not need to prove them so much and to not need reinforcement from him. So he's stepping back for a while because you're not using you're over relying on guides.
Yeah, that's really cool. I like that. I think people can have a tendency to look up to excessively, but by doing that, they are giving away some of their own spiritual authority, which is not necessary, because you can have it. But it is at some point you do have to build up that authority by doing the spiritual practice and getting the training and putting the years in. But absolutely, once you're at that point, so that's a great transition phase. So yeah, I do see that as part of that process. Yeah, so that's really cool to hear.
It's part of your confidence. It's it's like taking the training wheels off, and knowing that if you need the support, they will be there in a heartbeat, half a heartbeat. But you have to grow up at some stage and just it's that spiritual strength, the inner spiritual strength and sovereignty.
Yeah, and a lot of it's experience as well. So this comes back to that point about, how do I know if an ET device needs to be released? And here's one of the stories that you'll hear from the people. And so it's like, I was their mother in a past life. I'm an ET now that put it in. Well, it doesn't really add up to me. They can drop their training wheels and be a big boy now, but the other aspect of it is people might say their higher self agreed to it at that time. And then they like, oh, well, in that case, then everything's fine. Well, what does their higher self think now? Oh, well, actually, it's updated. Oh, and so a lot of times people gather information, but they stop, and you have to really dig out, be really an investigative journalist. And so a lot of these reasons why people do allow attachments to continue, I think, just they haven't dug deep enough, and and it's a matter of experience, and part of that can be because. And then, then they may ask, well, where's your spiritual authority coming from? And it can be your own spiritual practice, but it's also, my view is this: let's bring in Archangel Michael and Yeshua and ask them. And so, I can have a spiritual authority and tell them and pick apart, give them enough rope and say this doesn't really add up, and they'll agree with it. But that I would often do that and bring in spiritual guides and have their take on it. And I've never had them say, oh, actually, it was a good idea. She agreed to it and she needs to keep it. They're always exactly of that same mind, or they can add extra explanation or reaffirming an extra authority. And so that's one thing as well. You may, even if you, and that's something that if you've got a view that they're there and they should be, and I'll let them, then you're actually, you're actually exercising more authority than I would, which is you're making a decision on how it should or shouldn't be. So I'm not deciding they should be released. I'm really digging in. And what we're doing as well is also like double checking in a lot of ways. Does it make sense? And then we'll bring in these Michael, Yeshua, spiritual authorities and see what they think, or their current version of their higher self or spirit guides, and see what they say. And
absolutely, yeah. We always have to see ourselves as the facilitator and the guide, and that their team, their soul, their higher self are in charge, and you're just facilitating the process.
Yep,
that's how I.
Absolutely right, and yet it is such a balance, and I think. As they said, like we're facilitators, but we don't hand over all the authority to the higher self or the spirit guide. And there's that point. If you do that, and if you're allowed to do that, to be honest, what it means is you're not ready to have your training wheels taken off yet. But the minute that you are, they will tell you and say, don't overly rely on us. So on one hand, absolutely, we are there to guide them, or to facilitate and be a guide, and not to impose our own views. But at a certain point, what I find in complex situations is that it really is up to us to really take the lead, just much more important in Spirit Releasement Therapy than any other one, and to really do the work ourselves. So I think there can be a tendency in this kind of work to, I'm really nothing and I'm just going to let the spirit guide do everything for us, and to have the spirit guide say, hey buddy, actually the human really has a lot of power here and they really should be doing this work and not relying on us, that degree, but after a while becomes a fault. I think that's a really important phase. But if you're still in that phase, that's perfectly fine, but eventually you won't be. And for you to get that message, I think is really great. And this is also, when you're doing spirit releasement, you do need to really be able to do a lot of the work, right, and not leave it all up to the guides. So it's great to have guides, great to work with them directly, but at the end of the day, the agency and sovereignty and power really comes from the therapist, and I think they really need to own that, and that's morally and spiritually the appropriate thing to do. And if you doubt it, ask your guides, and they'll say, well, that makes sense, but not quite yet, or it is. We've been waiting for you to say this for so long. How many more lifetimes were you going to go doing this? You've got it. Excellent. Let's get to the next phase. Then maybe you go. Yeah.
Our development is entwined with the experiences. Every time you do a new client, you learn more. You learn more about yourself. You gain more confidence. You gain more skills. So it is a continual process. You don't wake up a guru. You're continually evolving.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, I can sit here and say that after 18 years of full time. So but as a teacher, it's really nice and to see other teachings, like they may appear to be directly contradictory, but they are all true, which is, it's true. And the Buddha would do this as well. People that ask him, are ETs real or not? Yes, they are. Another one would say, are they real or not? So absolutely no, they're not. It seems like they're wrong, but they're both the right answer for the right person. And so this is one thing as well. If people have different teachings, or I'm a teacher and they hear another teacher and we appear to be contradicting ourselves, I don't think real teachers really contradict themselves. I think they talk to what the student needs. And one thing can be then, as a student, not to buy into my teacher versus your teacher, and this is right and this is wrong. I think you can have two totally different teachings that are both exactly right according to the situation and the person that's involved and the level that they're at. So that's one thing as well. So a lot of people might think, oh, Mark and Katische are saying one thing, my other person said this. There's a contradiction where if you dig deeper into it, it may be a less contradictory than one thinks. What do you think?
Yeah, exactly. And you always hear the advice that you need to hear at that time, which may prompt you to investigate and change your mind later. It's part of the learning process, and it's also part of the process of saying, just because a teacher said this to me, how does it resonate with me?
Yeah.
Let me form my own opinion. And that may firstly involve you believing 100% what a teacher says and then going, no, actually, that's not my experience, and then forming your own belief. That's part of the process as well.
Yeah, I've found I've heard things and thought, that's incorrect. I don't believe it. It's wrong, and I was right for 3 years, and then I remembered it, and it became it went from being wrong to being right. All that happened was time, and passed by. But yeah, there's one of those little seeds as well. So if it doesn't click now, maybe it clicks later, and you get it as experience goes on. Yeah. So any key principles for you that you learn from doing this kind of work?
Yeah. Well, one is to I've really learned about the importance of exploring and continually learning about yourself, and being open to understanding the contradictions of your different lives and how there's no such thing as good and bad in terms of a lifetime. That's what past life regression has taught me from the contrasting lifetimes that I've had. It helps me view history differently, understand people and the roles that they have played in humanity differently. It's also helped me to I've learnt a lot about spirit guides in terms of checking, making sure they are who they say they are, and for having some grain of doubt so that you can check why you would have that spirit guide, so that there's a reason for that spirit guide. Because if there's no reason for that spirit guide, then they're probably not that spirit guide. It's probably something else, something false. I've found from my own experience that the spirit guides that I have, there's a really personal reason, and it's linked to something that is a soul growth. And that's why I can be 100% certain that person is that person, because I have not just experience now, but I have other experiences with that being that can be explained through other past lives. And that then solidifies my confidence and understanding, because it's a relationship that's building and has built over the journey that I've gone through.
Yeah, that's great. So is there something you would tell people who are interested in doing this kind of healing work or interested in being clients and working with you?
Well, if you've listened to this, and there's a reason. That's always the thing. I always say that if you've stumbled across a podcast on a topic or you've researched it, then there's probably a reason why you're interested. It's probably time for you to learn about that. I would highly recommend anybody go on to your website and learn the principles about that we've been talking about. Your courses are ridiculously amazing priced. They can go on your website or to Udemy. There's no harm in learning. You never know why you need to understand something, and always understand that you're not going insane. If you feel like you have experiences that need to be released or thoughts that need to be released, there's a reason for that. They're coming up for healing, and dig deep. Just dig deep. Don't be afraid of your own past, your own versions of yourself. Everything has a learning. And if you're bold enough and brave enough to really embrace that learning, you learn so much about yourself. It's just the best personal development ever.
Yeah. So the courses that I do can help people understand and see if this is a match. And you can have a look at Katische's website and YouTube, where she's got a lot of information and a lot of experience. You can see how she works. You've heard how she deals with things. So if you click with that, a next step can be A lot of times, as once you see that media presence, the next thing can be reach out and have a personal interactive experience. And so, there's a certain amount of study that you can do, but once you feel that, okay, I've got some rapport or connection or some curiosity, or feel that this is something that is going to be useful for me, the interactive phase of it is really important. And Katische and I both give sessions to deal with that. So it can be really interactive, and then you can have that real experiential way of understanding it. So there's only so much you can get reading a book or seeing podcasts or videos. To experience it yourself from the inside. Everyone's unique, and you can see how that goes. So the journey can continue experientially.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah. Any last words before we wrap it up? In fact, did I get it right? So did I get it right with your website and your socials? How people can contact you?
Yep, that's perfect. The website is the main place that I put everything. Podcasts, everything is all on the website. So yeah, just go have a look, and like for your website, fill out an application form if it's of interest.
Cool. Sounds great. So I encourage anyone to do that. So thanks so much for coming on the podcast. Great to see you.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening or watching. To find out more about my guest, see the links in the description for details. If you're interested in having personal sessions or certification training in hypnosis or hypnotherapy, or regression to this life, past lives, between lives, or spirit releasement therapy, then visit my website, thepastlifeawakeninginstitute.com, for details. Thanks so much for watching or listening, and see you next time.